Welcome back to Ancient Wisdom Unveiled, where we crack open Plutarch's Lives Volume 1 to reveal the minds that shaped antiquity. Plutarch, the master biographer, didn't just record history. He dissected the very soul of leadership. Today, we're not just looking at battles, but the brutal, brilliant decisions that defined empires. But here's the twist. Themistokles, the strategic genius who orchestrated Greece's salvation at Salamis against the mighty Persians, died in exile, seemingly a traitor to the very people he saved. And Camillus, Rome's redeemer after the devastating Gallic invasion, was himself banished by the ungrateful Republic. How could such monumental heroes fall so far? And did they deserve their fates? We'll uncover the political machinations and personal flaws that led them to the brink and beyond. You won't just get dates and names. We'll analyze the timeless lessons in leadership, ambition, and resilience that these incredible lives offer. So, if you're ready to explore the gripping drama and profound insights of ancient history, hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and of course, subscribe to Ancient Wisdom Unveiled so you don't miss any more of these epic tales. Let's dive in. Life of Themistokles. Themistokles was born of no illustrious house. His father, Neocles, was an ordinary Athenian of the Demi-Friari and the tribe Leontes. On his mother's side, his birth was recorded. An old epigram has it, "My name is Abradonon. I come from Thrace, not of old Athenian race. Yet humble though my lineage be, Themistokles was born of me." Others say she was from Caria, not Thrace, named Euterpe, or even from Halicarnassus in Caria. Whatever her origin, the mark of base birth clung to the boy. Such men were required to frequent Kainosarges, a gymnasium outside the walls sacred to Heracles, half divine himself and thought base-born among the gods. Themistokles, with early wit, persuaded noble youths to train there alongside him, undercutting the privilege of their birth. Yet by blood he was tied to the family of Lycomedes, for when the barbarians burned the temple of the initiation at Phlia, belonging to that clan, it was Themistokles who restored it. All agree that as a child he was vigorous, clever, and precocious in public affairs. In play he did not idle. He made mock speeches, rehearsing prosecutions and defenses of his companions. His master once said, "Child, you will be no ordinary man. You will be either very great or very base." He cared little for refinements, music, or ornament. What others called accomplishments, he dismissed. When mocked, he retorted coarsely but memorably, "I cannot tune a lyre nor play the harp, but I can make a small and obscure city great and glorious." Stesimbrotus claims him a pupil of Anaxagoras and Melissus. This is false. They were younger, allies of Pericles. More credibly, Themistokles was shaped by Nicephorus of Friari, not a philosopher, but a man practiced in statecraft, heir to the political wisdom of Solon. To this practical cunning more than philosophy, he owed his early formation. In youth he was unsettled, brilliant, but prone to vice. Later, he compared himself to unruly colts, hardest to break at first, yet the best in the end. Tales of his disinheritance or his mother's suicide are inventions. But it is told that his father, wishing to deter him from politics, once pointed to the abandoned triremes on the beach, saying, "So too are politicians cast aside once the people have done with them." But ambition burned in him. From his earliest days, he resolved to be first in the state. He set himself against the leaders of the hour, chiefly against Aristides, son of Lysimachus. Their quarrel began in youth, when both loved the same youth, Stesilaus of Chaos. In time, their rivalry deepened into politics. Aristides was steady and just, unmoved by popularity, striving only for right. Themistokles were daring, full of schemes. impatient to dazzle the people with new policies. Such ambition drove him even at Marathon, though still young. While Greece rang with Miltiades' victory, Themistocles withdrew from feasts, lay thoughtful, unable to sleep. When asked why, he said simply, "The trophies of Miltiades will not let me rest." For where others thought the war ended, he foresaw a greater storm brewing, and prepared himself to be Greece's champion. First, he proposed that the silver of Laurium, instead of being divided among the citizens, should be spent on ships. The measure passed, ostensibly against Aegina, hated rival and mistress of the sea. Thus were built 100 triremes, the very ships that later saved Greece against Xerxes. From that time, he bent Athens steadily toward the sea. He knew the city's infantry could not stand alone against neighbors, but with a fleet, Athens could repel barbarians and rule the Hellenic world. As Plato later said, he turned Athenians from settled soldiers into roving sailors. Others sneered. Themistocles took away their spears and shields and chained them to the oars. Miltiades opposed him, but he prevailed. Whether strictly lawful or not, events proved him correct. For when Xerxes marched, though his land army stood supreme, his navy's defeat broke him. He fled from Greece, leaving behind him unseasoned hosts. Some call Themistocles a shrewd moneyman. He spent lavishly, sacrifices, entertainment for foreigners. Others accuse him of avarice, even selling gifts. He was sharp in business. When a horse dealer refused him a colt, he threatened to turn his house into a wooden horse, meaning to unleash lawsuits upon him. His ambition tolerated no rival. Early, he brought the famed harpist Epicles to his house, so crowds would throng there. At Olympia he lived in luxury with Cimon, whose noble birth made such splendor befitting, but in Themistocles it seemed vulgar. Yet even these extravagances showed his drive for prominence. As Corregos in Athens, he inscribed proudly, "Themistocles of Phrearii produced a play. Phrynicus wrote it. Adimantus was archon." He knew every citizen by name, arbitrated disputes fairly, and would not bend the law, even for Simonides of Chaos. When asked to favor him, he answered, "You would be a poor poet out of tune. I would be a poor magistrate against the law." Bit by bit he won the people's trust, secured his party's dominance, and drove Aristides into exile. When Persia's invasion threatened, the Athenians sought a general. Many shrank from it. One demagogue, Epicides, lusted for command, eloquent, cowardly, corrupt. Themistocles, fearing ruin, bribed him quietly to withdraw. When Persian envoys pressed Greece for earth and water, Themistocles seized the interpreter, and by decree of the people put him to death, for daring to give barbarous commands in the tongue of free Greeks. So too Arthemias of Zelia. At Themistocles' urging, he was branded infamous forever for bringing Persian gold into Greece. Above all, Themistocles united the states of Greece, ending their petty wars, persuading them to defer all quarrels until after the Persian storm had passed. In this, he was aided by Chelon the Arcadian. Thus, by foresight and daring, Themistocles prepared Athens not only to survive, but to lead all Hellas. Once named general, Themistocles urged his countrymen at once to abandon their city, man the fleet, and meet the Persians far out at sea. Many resisted, but together with the Spartans, he marched a force as far as the Vale of Tempe, hoping to hold the passes there. When Thessaly betrayed Greece and the armies fell back, region after region, as far as Boeotia joined the barbarian, and Athens turned more willingly toward Themistocles' council of sea power. He sailed to Artemisium to guard the narrow straits. There the allies gave command to Eurybiades of Sparta, though Athens had furnished more ships than all the rest together. At that moment Themistocles saved Greece. He yielded leadership to Sparta, soothing the pride of his own people, telling them that if they proved valiant, all Greece would one day yield them supremacy. Thus he secured harmony, and at the same time glory, for he taught Athens to conquer her foes in battle, and her allies by self-restraint. At Artemisium, the battle was fierce but undecided. The Greeks learned, however, that neither the countless ships nor the splendid banners of the Persians mattered against men who dared close in and fought hand to hand. Confidence was kindled. As Pindar said, "There the sons of Athena laid their freedom's great foundation." Even today, they point out the shrines, the pillars inscribed in Artemis' honor, and the rich bed of ashes where wrecks and corpses were burned. When news came of Thermopylae' fall, the death of Leonidas, and the pass lost, the Greeks retreated, Athenians bravely covering the rear. Themistokles, sailing along, cut inscriptions upon conspicuous stones at every watering place. Each message called to the Ionians, urging them to come over to their fathers the Athenians, or at least to sow confusion among the barbarian ranks. If not to win them, he meant at least to make Xerxes distrust them. Meanwhile, the Persian king marched through Doris and Phocis, burning cities. The Greeks resolved only to defend the isthmus, walling it from sea to sea, and they abandoned Attica. Athens was left to ruin. Her allies would not stand with her. The Athenians raged at the betrayal and despaired. They shrank back from abandoning temples and ancestral tombs. Here Themistokles played his boldest part. Like a poet bringing gods upon the stage, he summoned signs and oracles. The sacred serpent of Athena had vanished from its shrine. The untouched offerings proved the goddess herself had departed, leading her people to the sea. He told them the wooden walls of the oracle meant the fleet, and that Apollo had called Salamis divine, a place not of sorrow, but of salvation. At last, by decree, the city was entrusted to Athena's care. The men embarked for war, the women and children carried to treason. The Troezenians welcomed them nobly, maintaining them at public expense, giving the children the right to pluck fruit from any tree, and even paying for their schooling. Aristotle says the Areopagus supplied the crews with pay, but others tell how Themistokles contrived it. Pretending the Gorgon's head was lost from the statue, he searched the citizens as they marched to the ships, confiscated the secret stores of wealth he discovered, and so equipped the fleet with all necessities. The sight of Athens abandoned moved many to tears. Old men lingered helpless. Animals ran howling toward the ships, unwilling to part from masters. They tell how the dog of Xanthippus, father of Pericles, leapt into the sea, swam beside its master's trireme to Salamis, then fell dead on the shore. Its tomb still shone as the dog's grave. Fearing that Aristides in exile might join the Persians, Themistokles himself proposed a decree to pardon all banished citizens, so that every Athenian might stand together in the common cause. At Salamis, Sparta still held the command under Eurybiades, who wished to sail away to join the Peloponnesian Wall. Themistokles stood firm. When Eurybiades said, "At the games they whip those who spring too soon," Themistokles replied, "Yes, but those who are too slow win no crowns." When his commander, angered, raised his staff as if to strike him, Themistokles only said, "Strike, yet hear me." His calmness astonished all. He argued fiercely to hold the straits of Salamis. Against an adversary who mocked him as a man without a city, he said, "We Athenians have left our walls, scornful of slavery for mere stones. But we still possess the greatest city of Greece, our 200 warships. With these we stand ready to save you, if you will be saved." At this, even Eurybiades feared the Athenians might sail away. Some say, in that hour an owl, the bird of Athena, flew to perch on Themistokles' mast, and the omen steadied the wavering Greeks. Yet when Xerxes came down to Phalerum, his host filling the seacoast and the king himself among the throngs. The Greeks again faltered. They glanced toward the isthmus, longing for safety, and prepared secretly to slip away by night. Then Themistokles made his master stroke. He summoned Sicinus, his Persian-born servant, who loved him and tended his children. He sent him secretly to the king with a false message, that Themistokles, general of the Athenians, desired to come over, and that he was first to reveal the Greeks' plan to flee. He urged Xerxes to block the straits at once, to fall upon the Greek ships while they were divided and in flight. Thus, by deceiving the barbarian and by forcing his allies into battle, Themistokles set the stage for the salvation of Greece. Xerxes, deceived by Themistokles' secret message, was elated. Convinced the trap would serve him, he ordered his captains to prepare at ease, save for 200 ships, which he dispatched at once to close the straits, surround the islands, and cut off every escape. At once Aristides, exiled by Themistokles, but noble and frank, came quietly to his tent. "We are surrounded," he said. Themistokles, trusting him, revealed his plan and begged Aristides to use his known honesty to hearten the Greeks for battle. Aristides did so, stirring courage, though some still doubted. Then came a trireme from Tinos, its captain Panaetios having deserted the Persians, announcing that the encirclement was true. With anger and desperation, the Greeks prepared for the fight. At dawn, Xerxes mounted a golden throne upon the cliffs above the straits, scribes at his side to record each deed. From there, above the temple of Heracles, he watched the sea, where his fleet pressed in. Themistokles, meanwhile, were sacrificed by the admiral's ship. Suddenly 3 noble boys were brought before him, sons of Sandoc, sister to the great king, splendid in dress and ornaments. Euphrantides the prophet cried that omens demanded these victims for Dionysus Omestes, the devourer of men. Themistokles shrank in horror, but the desperate mass of sailors, grasping at signs of heaven's favor, compelled him to consent. Thus, Phanias of Lesbos tells us, they perished at the altar, a grim offering before battle. Then the fleets launched. Aeschylus the poet, who fought that day, tells us plainly, Xerxes brought 1,000 warships, and 700 more of the fastest kind. The Athenians had 180 triremes, each with 18 men of arms on deck, archers, and hoplites in bronze. Themistokles chose his moment with genius. Not until the morning breeze rolled the seas did he give the word. The low, sturdy Greek hulls rode the swell easily, but the Persian ships, high-sterned, crowded, laden with ornament, swung clumsily broadside to the Greeks. Then the Athenians struck, taking courage from Themistokles himself, who stood foremost, and from the sight of Ariamenes, Xerxes' own brother and admiral, thundering down upon them in a giant ship. From its high decks, arrows and javelins poured as from a fortress. But Amanias of Decelia and Socles of Pedia, ramming prow to prow, splintered both ships. Ariamenes leapt to board, but was thrust into the sea with spears. His body floated, until Artemisia, queen and ally of Xerxes, found and bore it back to her master. In that hour, many swore they saw divine signs. From Eleusis gleamed a mysterious light. From the plain of Phrygia, sounds of the mystic Iacchus in procession, and an unseen mist drifted across the water. Others claimed they saw spirit warriors from Aegina, Aeacid heroes, stretching their hands to guard the Greek line. The first ship captured was seized by Lycomedes of Athens, who wreathed its ensign with laurel and offered it to Apollo. All day the narrow strait saved the Greeks. The Persians' numbers availed them nothing. Their ships collided, trapped broken. By evening, the sea was strewn with wreckage, and Simonides rightly sang of it as that glorious and famous victory, owed to the sailor's valor, and to Themistokles' genius. Enraged, Xerxes sought to fill the strait with earth, to force his land army across to Salamis. Themistokles at once suggested to Aristides that the Greeks should sail to the Hellespont, cut the bridge of boats, and trap Xerxes in Europe. Aristides cautioned him. So far we have fought a king at ease, idle under his golden parasol. Corner him in Greece, and you will face not a spectator, but the man himself, driving his army in desperation. Better to build him a bridge than break one. Send him out of Europe swiftly. Themistokles yielded. Secretly, he sent word through a captured eunuch to Xerxes. The Greeks plan to break your bridge. Hurry back and cross while you may. I will delay them for you. Xerxes, alarmed, fled in haste. At Plataea, where Mardonius fell, it was proven true. The Greeks could scarcely withstand a fragment of Persia's host. What if they had faced it all? In honors, the allies at first quarreled. Each general cast his vote at the isthmus. Each wrote his own name for first in valor, and Themistokles for second. Yet Sparta crowned him for wisdom, gifting him an olive crown and their finest chariot, and 300 youths to escort him from Laconia. At Olympia, when next he appeared, the vast crowd forgot the games themselves to gaze only at Themistokles, applauding and pointing him out to strangers. Moved, he said to friends, "This day, truly, I have my reward for Greece." By nature he craved honor, but bore it with wit. Once, when admiral, he delayed all business until the fleet's day of sailing, so that all attention would turn to him at once. Passing corpses floating with gold ornaments, he himself left them untouched, saying scornfully to a friend, "Take them. It is you, not Themistokles." To a sullen Athenian youth, Antiphates, he said at last, "It takes time, but see, we have both come to our senses." He quipped that the Athenians used him as a plane tree, sheltering in his shade during storms, only to strip his branches in fair weather. A Seriphian once taunted him, "Your greatness you owe to Athens, not yourself." "True," he replied. "Had I been born in Seriphos, I would not be great. But had you been born in Athens, you would be no greater than you are now." When rival generals boasted about their worth, he said, "The feast once mocked the day after, saying, 'All men enjoy their fill because of me.' The morrow replied, 'But for me, you would never have been.' And so with me, where would you all be, had I not come first?" Even of his household he jested. His spoiled young son ruled his mother ruled him. The Athenians obeyed him, and thus declared Themistokles, "My son rules all Greece." Such was the man, daring, sharp-tongued, consumed by ambition for Athens, and by ambition, savior of Greece. When Themistokles fled across the Aegean, he found little welcome. At Kyme and among the Ionian cities, men hunted him, for Persia had set a price of 200 talents upon his head. Pursued by would-be captors, he escaped to the Aeolian town of Aegae, where only one man knew him, Nicogenes, the richest in those parts, and trusted by Persians inland. In his house the great exile lay hidden. There, after a sacrifice and feast, one of the household fell into prophetic frenzy and spoke, "Night shall give thee counsel, night shall give thee victory." That night Themistokles dreamed a dream. A serpent rose across his body, coiled to his throat, and then became an eagle, which bore him skyward and set him down safely on a golden staff of a herald. He woke up relieved. Soon after, Nicogenes devised means to send him forward. Knowing Persian custom, that women must travel in curtained wagons unseen, he placed Themistokles within such a carriage, claiming it was a noble lady bound for the king's court. Thus disguised, he crossed the land unnoticed. Some say he came before Xerxes himself, but more likely, as Thucydides tells, Xerxes was dead, and he surrendered to Artaxerxes, the son. To Artabanus the Chiliarch he first spoke, "I am a Greek. I bring matter of weight for the king himself." The Persian warned him, Our custom is worship of the king. If you will prostrate, you may stand before him. If not, speak through others. Themistokles agreed. The god has exalted Persia. I too will bow, and increase the number of those who fall before the king. At last he came before Artaxerxes. Prostrating, he declared, I am Themistokles the Athenian, an exile. I have harmed Persia much, yet in truth I helped you more than harmed. For when I might have chased you in ruin, I checked pursuit. See now in my banishment proof of how great my service was, for my countrymen, fearing my power, cast me out. Use me then to display your magnanimity. Make me your servant, rather than glut your anger. He told, too, of his visions and oracles, claiming destiny had sent him. The king, astonished by his boldness, uttered no rebuke, but prayed aloud that his foes might ever banish their most able men. He sacrificed, rejoicing, and even in sleep cried out, I have Themistokles the Athenian. Life of Camillus. The strangest fact about Furius Camillus is this: though he triumphed in great battles, though he was 5 times dictator, though he celebrated for triumphs, and was hailed the second founder of Rome, he never once was consul. It was the temper of the times. In those days, the people, bitter against the Senate, refused consuls, and instead chose military tribunes with consular power. 6 men sharing equal command appeared less oppressive than 2, and so by this means the people felt themselves free. It was in this system that Camillus rose to honor. Always he bore power with moderation, yet by genius alone he claimed the victories. Thus, while he never sought to wrest the consulship from the will of the people, his brilliance gave him all the glory that Rome could confer. His family was of no great note before him. He first came to fame serving under the dictator Postumius Tiburtus in battle against Equi and Volsci. Struck through the thigh by a dart, he tore out, rode forward, and routed the bravest of the enemy. From that day, his name was an honor. Later he was appointed censor, an office then of weight and dignity. As censor, he compelled the unmarried men to take wives, pleading the needs of the state and threatening fines. For wars had thinned Rome's men, leaving many widows. He even taxed the orphans, who had been free from levy, for the burdens of war pressed heavily, most of all the costly siege of Veii. Veii was a bulwark of Etruria, wealthy, populous, and proud. Often it had contended with Rome as an equal. Now, defeated in an open field, its citizens entrenched themselves mightily within high stone walls. They filled the city with food and arms, determined to endure. The siege dragged on for years. The Romans, who had been accustomed to short summer campaigns and winters at home, for the first time built huts, forts, and maintained a camp in the enemy's country winter after winter, for 7 years in succession. Murmurs rose against the generals, who were seen as dawdling. They were removed. New leaders took their place. Among these, Camillus, yet as tribune only. But even then, he drew off to fall upon the Faliscans and Capanates, enemies long harassing Rome during the Veientine War. He struck them hard and drove them to their gates. During that time, a strange omen struck all Italy with awe. The Alban Lake, usually calm, suddenly rose high, though no rain had fallen. It overflowed its banks, creeping up the surrounding hills, then burst through, pouring in a torrent down to the sea. Shepherds first marveled. Soon all Italy whispered of it as a portent. In the Roman camp before Veii, it was the talk of every circle, and even the besieged knew of it. One Roman, in converse with a citizen of Veii who was skilled in oracles, saw him smile at the tail of the lake. Overhearing him say in triumph that Rome had no hope now, the Roman feigned curiosity, drew him out beyond the gates, and suddenly seized him. Hauled before the generals, the captive revealed an ancient prophecy. Veii could not be taken until the waters of the Alban Lake were turned aside from the sea. At once Rome sent an embassy to Delphi. The god Apollo declared, sacrifices had been neglected in the Latin games. These must be performed anew. And as for the lake, its waters must be turned by canals into the plain. So men labored to drain the flood, while priests made sacrifices. In the 10th year of war, Rome chose Camillus as dictator. He named Cornelius Scipio master of the horse, and vowed to build a temple to Mater Matuta, the goddess, like the Greek Leucothea, who nurses children and protects new life. First, Camillus crushed the Faliscans and Capanates in battle, and then turned to Veii. Perceiving the difficulty of storming the high walls, he devised mines. The ground was soft, the work concealed. While the city above was distracted by feints and assaults, Roman diggers burrowed beneath, until they reached the great temple of Juno in the citadel. There, it was said, the Veientine king stood sacrificing. The soothsayer declared that the victory would belong to him who completed the sacrifice. In that moment the Romans burst through the floor with clamor and steel, seized the offering, and bore it back to Camillus. Whether the tale is legend or not, the truth is, Veii fell. The Romans poured into the city, heaping up plunder beyond all measure. From the citadel, Camillus looked down. At first he wept. Then, when his soldiers congratulated him, he raised his hands to heaven. Great Jupiter, ye gods who see all, ye know that it was not by injustice we conquer, but in defense of Rome against lawless enemies. Yet if in payment for this great fortune there must be misfortune, let it fall on me, and upon me alone. As he turned from prayer, he stumbled and fell. His men gasped at the omen. But Camillus rose, saying with steadiness, "It is as I asked. The gods have already struck me lightly, that the heavier blow may spare Rome." Then he vowed the dedication of Juno's image. Workmen prepared to move the statue. Camillus prayed that the goddess consent to come to Rome. The statue, some said, answered in assent. Others reported only that bystanders felt it moved and cried aloud, "She consents, she will go." However, the goddess was brought to Rome, and Camillus gave her a place among the gods of the city. Miracle or no, these things were believed, and Rome herself seemed to prosper by heaven's hand. Such tales of statues speaking and groaning, of images sweating and turning away, were common in Roman memory, and whether they be true or not, they reveal how men of that age felt the gods present in every act of their city. Thus did Camillus capture Veii, mighty walls, wealthy streets, and Juno's own statue, all given into the hands of Rome by the strength of her armies, and, as the Romans believed, by the favor of heaven. After his great victory at Veii, Camillus seemed lifted by the gods themselves. Yet pride, or perhaps the extravagance of his admirers, led him into error. In his triumph he rode through Rome on a chariot drawn by 4 white horses, as though he were Jupiter himself. No Roman general before or after dared such a display. The sight displeased the citizens, plain men unused to grandeur, and their discontent grew when he opposed a popular law. The tribunes had proposed to divide the Roman people, sending half to live in captured Veii, so that 2 great cities would serve as one. The poor pressed for it eagerly, thinking of land and houses to be gained, while the nobles raged, foreseeing the ruin of Rome itself. Camillus, fearing the contest, delayed the vote with excuses and avoided a decision. This bred suspicion that he opposed the people's good. Then came another wound to his reputation. On the march to Veii, he had vowed 1/10 of the spoils to Apollo, should the city fall. But when Veii was taken, amid the clamor and plundering, he either forgot or shrank from demanding that tithe. Later, when his dictatorship ended, he remembered, and priests declared that heaven was offended, for the omens showed divine anger. Too late he ordered the soldiers to swear and repay 1/10 of all they had taken. Poor men, who had spent their share already, were stung bitterly. They cried out that Camillus had vowed away not the wealth of the enemy, but the property of his fellow citizens. Yet the tithe was gathered. A golden bowl was cast to send to Apollo at Delphi. Rome had little gold. Then, wondrously, the matrons of the city, gathering together, offered their ornaments freely. 8 talents were weighed. For this generosity they were granted new honors. Henceforth women's funerals also might be adorned with public orations, as men's were. 3 noble envoys sailed with the offering. Storms drove them near destruction, and pirates from Lipara seized them. Saved only by the justice of a single man, Themistokles, they were released, escorted onward to Delphi, and Rome bestowed on him solemn honors for his uprightness. But the tribunes renewed their cry for land in Veii. Camillus, once more chosen as military tribune, diverted the restless people with war against the Faliscans. After victory in the field, he besieged Falerii. It was a strong city, well provisioned, a hard, long business. This suited Roman policy. Men idle at home grew turbulent. Better to occupy them before the enemy's walls. Then came the treachery. One schoolmaster, entrusted with the children of the chief families of Falerii, led them daily outside the gates for exercise. At last he betrayed them, surrendering the boys to the Romans and begging for a reward from Camillus. The Roman leader was horrified. War is harsh, but still it has its laws. Victory comes not from villainy, but from valor. He ordered the man stripped, bound, and scourged, not by Romans, but by the children themselves, who drove him back into Falerii with blows. The city, when it beheld this strange sight, was shaken with admiration. They sent ambassadors at once, proclaiming, "We seem not conquered in arms, but overcome in virtue." They surrendered, not to compulsion, but to justice. And Camillus, taking only a moderate ransom, left them free allies of Rome. But the Roman soldiers, cheated of plunder, murmured that Camillus hated the people, and envied poor men their share of gain. When he openly withstood the cry to leave Rome and settle half her people at Veii, hatred deepened. Then domestic misfortune struck him. One of his sons died. Yet even this sorrow wrung no compassion from the angry populace. Soon enemies accused him of embezzling the rich spoils of Etruria. They even said he kept bronze gates stolen from Veii. His accuser was Lucius Appuleius. The people burned for vengeance, eager to condemn him whether guilty or not. Camillus turned to his old comrades, begging that they stand by him. But they only promised to help pay any fine. Despairing, in wrath he decided on exile. Silently he left his house. At the city gates he paused, turned toward the Capitol, and lifted his hands. "O Jupiter and ye gods, if I am driven from Rome unjustly, by envy, by insolence, then let the Romans regret this deed. Let them crave my return. Let them need again their Camillus." Like another Achilles, so he cursed his own people and departed. In his absence, untried and undefended, he was condemned, fined 15,000 asses. Thus Rome lost her greatest man, cast aside by her own ingratitude. And soon, men said, justice answered his prayer. For presently there fell upon Rome a calamity, so terrible that all mouths remembered the exile of Camillus. The first omens came at once. The death of Julius the censor, an office held sacred and itself a portent. Then a stranger warned still, Marcus Furius, a man of no rank yet of good repute, reported that as he walked alone on the new road by night, a mighty voice hailed him, "Go, and warn the magistrates that the Gauls are coming." The tribunes laughed him off as a fool. But soon, as Camillus went into exile, those words, unheeded, proved all too true. The Gauls were a Celtic race, restless and overflowing with numbers. Too many for their native lands, they divided. One vast swarm pressed toward the far northern seas, the other turned toward the Pyrenees and the Alps. When first they tasted wine, brought into their country from Italy, they were inflamed with wonder and desire. Grasping arms, seizing families and wagons, they streamed over the mountains into Etruria, seeking the land that yielded such marvelous fruit. The man who lured them was said to be Aruns, an unhappy Etruscan, once guardian of a wealthy orphan named Lucumo. He discovered too late that the youth had seduced his wife. Rich, shameless, Lucumo triumphed over him in the courts. Broken, Aruns fled. In his bitterness, he beckoned the Gauls into Italy. They fell upon the fair Etruscan plain that stretched between the upper and lower seas, land of oak and pasture, rich with towns. 18 great cities they seized and made their own. Already long before our story, they had established themselves there. Now under their king Brennus, the Gauls marched against Clusium. Besieged, the city called Rome to its aid. Rome sent 3 envoys, all from the noble Fabian house. Brennus received them kindly for the name of Rome's greatness. They asked what wrong had driven him to attack Clusium. Brennus laughed. They wrong us by hoarding more land than they till, denying us who are many and poor. Was it not so with you Romans, when you laid Albalo, and Fidene, and Ardea, and Veii herself? You call it conquest, but it is the oldest law of gods and beasts alike. The strong take from the weak. Cease then to prate of pity, lest Gauls learn compassion from Romans, who never showed it. It was plain he meant no peace. The Fabii entered Clusium, and worse, they joined the citizens in a sally against the besiegers. Quintus Ambustus, one of the brothers, distinguished himself in the fray. On horseback, he struck down a Gaul and stripped his body. Brennus saw and thundered. This was sacrilege against the law of nations. An ambassador turned enemy. Calling the gods to witness, he broke off the fight and led his host south toward Rome. Yet even then he sent envoys first, demanding that the guilty Fabius be given up for punishment. At Rome the Senate murmured consent, and the priests, the Fetials, guardians of Rome's faith and treaties since the days of Numa, charged the Fabii with profaning religion. But the people, flattered by their boldness, were obstinate. Not only did they refuse to surrender them, they elected the Fabii as military tribunes for the year. When Brennus heard, fury seized him. He pushed his host forward with speed. Along their march the peoples of Italy quailed, but the Gauls passed them by, crying out that they sought no war with any save the Romans. Rome armed. 40,000 legionaries mustered, numbers to match the invaders, but raw recruits, untrained. Over them were many tribunes sharing equal command. In lesser wars, Rome had often turned to a single dictator. Now, when unity was most needed, her folly bore fruit. Camillus, Rome's savior, was in exile. No man dared to command with authority. 11 miles from the city, they camped on the Tiber, by the little river Allia. There they met the barbarians. In midsummer, the two hosts closed. The Romans fought without plan, without omen or sacrifice. Brennus' charge shattered them. The Gallic onslaught broke the left wing and hewed it down into the stream. The right, climbing for the safety of the hills, alone survived, fleeing to Veii. The rest were butchered where they stood, until the Gauls weary of slaughter. Thus perished Rome's army. The date was ever after accursed, the day of Aealia. It was the same day on which the Fabii had once before met their doom, centuries past, 300 slain by Etruscans. Yet this disaster was greater, blotting out the shame of the former one. Ever after, that day was held unlucky. Romans would not marry, march, or undertake business upon it. And from that night forward, Rome lay open before the Gauls. Had the Gauls pursued their victory at the Allia, Rome would have perished utterly. But drunken with triumph, they lingered, feasting, dividing spoils from the Roman camp. That delay saved the remnants of the city. Some fled, others steeled themselves to endure. The capital was fortified, the holy relics gathered there, while the Vestal virgins, guardians of Rome's eternal flame, fled southward with their sacred burden. Much was whispered of what they carried. Some said only the undying fire, consecrated since the days of King Numa. Others swore they bore the Trojan Palladium itself, or the gods of Samothrace, brought once to Troy by Dardanus. At the least they placed their most hallowed treasures in hidden jars, said to lie beneath the temple of Quirinus, where men of later ages still pointed to the Doliola, the place of the jars. As they fled, the Vestals met Lucius Albinus, a plebeian farmer, escaping with wife and children on a wain. Seeing the maidens trudging wearily on foot with Rome's sacred things in their arms, he lifted down his family and possessions, and gave the cart to the virgins. Thus the flame of Numa was borne safe away, a deed long remembered. Meanwhile the old men of Rome, consuls of former years, priests, patricians, could not quit their city. At the urging of Fabius, Pontifex Maximus, they dressed in their ivory robes, seated themselves in curule chairs within the forum, and waited like sacred victims, dedicating themselves for Rome. On the third day after the Allia, Brennus came. At first he mistrusted the silence of gates open, walls unguarded. But entering by the Colline gate, he marched unopposed into Rome, 360 years from her founding. Strange rumors crossed even to Greece. Heraclides of Pontus wrote of Hyperboreans sacking a colony by the Western Ocean, perhaps a fragment of this truth. Brennus marched into the forum and found the row of fathers seated in majesty, white-haired men gazing calmly, unmoved. For a moment the Gauls held back, awed, as though before gods. Then one warrior, daring, stroked the long beard of Marcus Furius. The Roman struck him on the head with his staff. Enraged, the barbarian slew him, and instantly the spell was broken. The Gauls cut them down, sacked Rome street by street, slew the rest they found, and fired the houses to ash, raging that the capital held firm against them. So began a long siege. The Gauls starved, and parties of them scattered across Latium to plunder. The largest band marched toward Ardea, where Camillus dwelt, an exile. He, though outlawed, still lived the life of a Roman general in his heart. Speaking first to the youth of Ardea, he told them, "The Gauls are not so strong. It is Rome's folly that gave them victory. If we strike boldly, these drunken marauders will fall." With the magistrate's assent, he mustered the men, concealed them within the walls until night. Then, as the Gauls lay heavy with feasting and wine, he burst upon them with shouts and trumpets. Few roused themselves, most perished in their sleep. Those who fled were hunted down at dawn by cavalry. It was a slaughter. News of Camillus' deed spread swiftly. Romans sheltering in Veii rejoiced and wept. Rome is lost, yet Camillus lives. Rome's glory now shines for Ardea, while the city that cast him out dies without her savior. Soldiers clamored to follow him. They went with a message, "Be our general again." But Camillus refused. "I will not hold command without the voice of Rome." The capital still stands. While one Roman lives there, he is Rome. Only if they appoint me shall I lead. Yet how to reach the capital? Ringed by Gauls. Then Pontius Cominius, a young plebeian of spirit, stepped forth. He carried no letter, lest he be captured. Cork floats he strapped about him. By day he walked boldly. By night he plunged into the Tiber, his clothes bound on his head. He drifted past the guarded bridge, came ashore where the cliff of the Carmental Gate rose steeply. Alone, he climbed the rock by a hidden gully, hands torn, until he reached the citadel. Welcomed with wonder, he spoke before the Senate. Camillus had struck down the barbarians at Ardea. Soldiers at Veii awaited him, but would obey no other. Let the Senate name him dictator, that Rome might yet be saved. Thus hope returned to the capital, frail, besieged, yet not dead. The Senate, hearing Pontius Camillus' daring report, resolved to make Camillus dictator once more. The young man retraced his path, crossing river and cliff as before, and carried their decree to the Romans at Veii. News of Camillus' recall roused every man. 20,000 Romans gathered, swollen with allies from neighboring towns. From exile and disgrace, Camillus now stood again as Rome's champion. Meanwhile in the city, the Gauls discovered the path Pontius had taken up the rock. Brennus, their king, called his fittest climbers. Where one man has mounted, many may follow. Shall we leave unfinished what we began so gloriously? By night they scaled the cliff silently. Neither dogs barked nor sentinels stirred. But in the temple of Juno there were geese, sacred and half-starved. Roused by hunger and the faintest sound, they shrieked, flapped, and stirred the camp. The Romans woke to arms. At the forefront came Marcus Manlius, a man of consular rank. He met the first Gauls at the rampart. One lifted a mighty axe. Manlius cut his hand clean off. Another he crushed with a shield and hurled down the cliff. Others rushed up, but fell back terrified. The Romans drove the survivors down the rock. The sentinel who had slept they themselves cast headlong. Manlius they were rewarded with rations from every man's store, honor rather than profit. The Gauls grew weary of their siege. Disease spread in their camp among ashes, corpses, and the heat of Rome's plains. Food failed them. Foraging parties feared Camillus' shadow. Yet within the capital, famine gnawed also. After 7 endless months, the Romans faltered. Terms were sought. Brennus and the Roman tribune Sulpicius agreed. A ransom, the city's life for 1,000 pounds of gold. The scales were brought. As the payment was weighed, the Gauls tampered, then pressed the beam down. Outraged, the Romans protested. Brennus, sneering, cast his own sword and belt upon the balance. Vi victis, woe to the vanquished. Open fury rose. But even as Romans hesitated between shame and necessity, Camillus entered. In gleaming armor, he strode through the throng, his soldiers silently behind him. Taking the gold from the scale, he cast it to the ground, not with gold, but with iron. Does Rome defend herself? Remove those scales, Gauls, your ransom is denied. Brennus shouted outrage, but Camillus declared, the treaty is void. I am dictator, and none but I had authority. You bargained with men who could not bind Rome. Now I come with lawful power, to pardon the submissive, to punish the foe. Steel rang against steel. In the press of narrow streets, swords flashed. But Brennus drew back, rallied his men, and camped 8 miles off on the Gabinian road. At dawn Camillus followed, leading the renewed Romans, their courage burning bright again. The battle was fierce, but Rome's regained spirit and Camillus' generalship prevailed. The Gauls were broken, their camp taken, fugitives cut down or slain by villagers as they straggled. Thus Rome was twice preserved, first by the stubborn capital, then by Camillus' arms. For 7 months the barbarians had sat upon her ashes. Then they departed, leaving ruin behind. Camillus entered the city in triumph, not as conqueror of foreign lands, but as deliverer, savior of his own. Those who had endured the siege on the capital came forth weeping, embracing those who had fled. Priests drew out the sacred things they had saved in secret or borne away, displaying them as though the gods themselves now returned with Camillus. Sacrifices were offered, the city purified, and Camillus built new shrines, among them one to Rumor, where Marcus Furius had once heard the mysterious voice foretelling the Gallic invasion. Yet hardship now turned men's minds again. Rome was ashes, houses gone, temples broken. To rebuild meant toil and misery. Vi, whole and ready, still stood. Many poor Romans yearned to abandon the ruins and cross over. Agitators again murmured against Camillus, that he compelled them to labor in desolation, seeking to stand not only as Rome's general, but as Romulus himself, the refounder of the city. Fearing defection, the Senate kept Camillus in power beyond all precedent, a dictator for a year, when none before had held 6 months. Senators themselves implored the people, "Do not desert the soil where Romulus and Numa planted our shrines. Recall the augury of the severed head found for the capital. Rome foreordained the head of Italy. Shall we extinguish Vesta's flame and leave our temples to cattle?" Moved by these entreaties, and bound again by omens and memories, the people at last yielded. With bitter tears, they turned to clear the ruins, to raise once more a city from her charred bones. And so, through Camillus' arms and Rome's faith, the city was not only saved but reborn. In the midst of bitter debate, Camillus himself rose to speak. With long and persuasive eloquence, he pleaded for Rome, for the ashes of her temples, for the soil sanctified by her founders. At last, as votes were about to be cast, a strange and sudden omen gave decision. A centurion passing with his guard cried aloud to the standard-bearer, "Halt here. Pitch the standard. Here it is best for us to stay." The words, caught by all ears, were taken as heaven's voice. Lucius Lucretius, the first to vote, bowed to the omen. One after another, all the rest concurred. And suddenly the people, swept from thought of Vi, turned to raise Rome anew. But in haste and confusion the streets were rebuilt, crooked and cramped, each man taking ground where he might. So Rome rose again in a labyrinth of lanes and badly ordered houses. But Rome endured. An omen, too, heartened them. Upon the Palatine, as temples were marked anew, the augur staff of Romulus, the Lituus, was found, unburned, beneath the ashes. All else the Gauls had destroyed, yet this ancient symbol of Rome's founding rights, the very instrument of Romulus taking auspices, remained. Men believed it a sign that Rome and her empire would be eternal. Scarcely was the city raised from ruin when war fell upon her again. The Equians, Volscians, Latins, and Etruscans pressed in on every side. The city of Sutrium, an ally, was besieged. Camillus was named dictator for the 3rd time. One tale tells of the Latins demanding Roman maidens for wives. The magistrates, in fear and perplexity, sent instead maidservants, arrayed like noble brides. At night these slaves stole the daggers of their masters and gave a signal torch from the boughs of a fig tree. Romans burst from their gates, surprised the drunken camp, and struck it down. Ever after, the Noni Capitini festival recalled that night, when slave girls saved Rome. Yet most held a sterner account. Camillus, called to rescue Roman troops, penned by Latins and Volsci at the Martian heights, led even the old to arms. By stealth he marched, appeared with fires blazing on the hills, heartened the trapped soldiers. At dawn, a strong wind rising, he cast firebrands against the wooden ramparts of the enemy. Camps wreathed in flame, the foe, hemmed in, broke forth into slaughter. Few escaped. The rest were slain or perished in the fire. Nor did Camillus rest. He stormed the capital of the Equians, subdued the Volscians, and, hearing of Sutrium taken, met the dispossessed people fleeing, weeping, with wives and children. He led his army straight back upon the drunken victors, broke through the unguarded gates, and retook Sutrium that same day, the city lost and won twice in one sun's course. For these deeds he triumphed again, silencing those who said luck, not skill, had brought him greatness. Even his enemies now admitted the brilliance of his generalship. But envy could not be long stilled. Against Camillus rose Marcus Manlius Capitolinus, once savior of the capital in the Gallic night assault. Seeking to rival Camillus' fame, he courted the common people, defending debtors, defying creditors, stirring riots. He accused Camillus of grasping at kingship, an old calumny against great men in Rome. Tumult shook the forum. Manlius was seized and cast into prison, but the people mourned as though in disaster. Frightened, the Senate released him. He grew only worse, more violent, more ambitious, more dangerous. At length Camillus was again a military tribune. The trial of Manlius was renewed. But in the forum, his judges confronted the sight of the Capitol rising above, the very rock from which Manlius had hurled down the Gauls. He himself pointed to it with tears, recalling that night of glory. Moved by memory, the people faltered. The court adjourned again and again. Then Camillus made a decision. The trial must be held elsewhere. He removed it to the Pedelian Grove, beyond the gates, where the Capitol was out of sight. There, free of the impression of his past heroism, the judges listened only to his crimes. Manlius was condemned, led back to the Capitol itself, the scene of his greatest deed. He was cast headlong from the rock. So the same cliff that had witnessed his noblest victory now saw his destruction. The Romans razed his house, and on its site built the temple of Juno Moneta. And they decreed that never again might any patrician dwell upon the Capitoline hill. Such was the fate of Manlius Capitolinus, savior of Rome once, but ruined by envy of Camillus, and by his own grasping ambition. When Camillus was chosen for the military tribune for the 6th time, he begged the people to excuse him. Age pressed heavily, and sickness weakened him. Perhaps, too, he feared the envy of heaven, that such unbroken glory might provoke divine retribution. Yet the citizens would not release him. "We do not ask you to ride or fight, but only to guide us, to advise and to command," they cried. And so, unwilling, Camillus took the charge again. Though he wished to remain inactive while illness clung to him, his colleague Lucius Furius, rash and eager, dragged Rome into battle. Predictably, disaster followed. The army broke, many fled. Hearing this, Camillus sprang from his litter, seized weapons, and rushed to the camp gates. There he rallied the fugitives, drove back the pursuing enemy, and turned rout into renewed fight. On the morrow, leading out the whole force, he crushed the foe outright and stormed their camp. So once again Camillus proved Rome had judged rightly. Even in age and sickness, he was worth more than a host of young commanders greedy for honor. After this, he struck the Etruscans at Sutrium, avenging the slaughter of Roman colonists. Then, moved by the repentance of Tusculum, he persuaded the Senate to forgive the city and admit its people as Roman citizens. Thus, in his 6th tribuneship, he showed both stern might and merciful wisdom. But when new strife broke out at home, the plebeians demanding consuls of their own order, Rome turned to Camillus yet again. Against his will, the Senate made him dictator for a 4th time. He tried to avert conflict, summoning the people to military levy, but the tribunes countered with threats to fine him, and rather than risk disgrace or a second banishment, Camillus resigned, pleading sickness. Soon, however, peril from abroad reconciled all quarrels. Word came that the Gauls were on the march once more, burning and plundering. At nearly 80 years old, Camillus was named dictator for the 5th time. He made no excuse. He raised an army at once. Knowing the Gauls' manner of fighting, he equipped the Romans with iron helmets smooth and rounded, so that the barbarians' swords might glance away or shiver on the metal. He strengthened shields with bronze rims. He ordered long pikes to meet and break the Gaulish blades. When Brennus' host encamped on the Anio, heavy with plunder, Camillus kept his men hidden in a valley, showing only a trembling handful to tempt the foe's contempt. The Gauls, careless and scattered, fell into disorder. Then Camillus struck. Light troops harried them. Pikes splintered their soft iron swords. Armor turned aside their blows. As their weapons bent, their shields stuck fast. The Romans closed with short blades. Panic seized the barbarians. Routed and slaughtered, they fled the field. From that day the Gauls, once dreaded, seemed contemptible. Rome passed a law thereafter. No priest should ever serve in war, save in the dread case of a Gallic invasion. This was Camillus' last campaign. He also took Velletri, but the true battle then was in the Forum. Plebeians demanded one consulship for their order. The Senate refused. Tumult rose. As dictator, Camillus sat in open session when an officer of the tribunes sought to seize him by the hand. Fury broke in the crowd. Violence threatened. Camillus raised his eyes to the Capitol and prayed, "O gods, bring this to a happy end. And if concord is granted to Rome, I vow a temple shall rise to concord." And so it was. The Senate yielded, granting one consulship to the plebs. The law was passed. At elections, Marcus Aemilius, a patrician, and Lucius Sextius, the first plebeian consul, were chosen together. Rome had taken a great stride toward unity of orders, and Camillus had been its architect. The following year plague struck the city, sweeping away nobles and commons alike. Among them fell Camillus, full of years and honors. Romans mourned him more deeply than any, for he was their savior against VI, their deliverer from the Gauls, their reconciler in civil strife. He was remembered as the second founder of Rome. So ended the life of Marcus Furius Camillus, warrior, peacemaker, exile, and restorer, the man whose hand, more than any other, rebuilt the city after ruin, and whose death left Rome orphaned of her greatest guardian.